"This is the unluckiest lawyer I've ever seen." In his quest to find some lost evidence, he decisively jumped into a dumpster to search for it. Not only did he almost grab a handful of feces, but he also got a pile of garbage dumped on him. But what broke him the most was that the evidence was found in a small trash can right next to him. In the end, his efforts paid off. With the help of his brother Chuck, they managed to obtain crucial evidence of Sandpiper Crossing's fraud against its clients. Since Sandpiper Crossing is a nationwide chain of retirement homes with countless clients, it can be inferred that the amount of fraud involved is astronomical. If they can win this lawsuit, Jimmy will have a major comeback. However, the opposing legal team is no pushover. During the first round of defense between Jimmy and Rick's subordinates sent a pile of documents proving their client's innocence to Chuck's house. Clearly, such a big case is far beyond the capacity of 1 or 2 people. Chuck suggested that they hand the case over to the HHM law firm, but Jimmy vehemently disagreed. He was unwilling to hand over the big case he had painstakingly discovered, especially to his arch-nemesis Howard. To convince Jimmy, Chuck analyzed the situation from all angles. If we rely solely on our efforts to fight Rick's entire team, the opposition will keep playing tricks to waste our time, which will cause the case to drag on for years. Moreover, those clients of yours are elderly. Their lifespans might not last until the end of the lawsuit. Chuck advised Jimmy to face reality and that handing it over to HHM was the best choice. In the end, Jimmy was persuaded by his brother.
Fine.
So, the case goes to HHM?
Hail Satan. I submit to the dark side.
A disappointed Jimmy could only console himself by saying he could have an office next to Chuck's. Jimmy assumed that since he brought such a big case to HHM, Howard would surely hire him as a lawyer and let him choose any office he wanted. Hearing this, Chuck fell into deep thought. It seemed he was planning something. After Jimmy fell asleep, Chuck began to act. He picked up a pencil and a pair of high-temperature resistant gloves from the drawer. Then, Chuck, wrapped in a space blanket, went to the mailbox outside. He picked up Jimmy's turned-off phone and turned it on. He then skillfully dialed a number.
Yes, hello. No, it's me.
Although there was no specific conversation content, this laid a crucial foreshadowing for the upcoming plot. The next morning, Jimmy thoughtfully custom-made a space blanket suit for his brother because Chuck needed to attend a meeting at HHM for the case transfer. Worried about Chuck having any sudden issues, Jimmy and Chuck agreed on a signal for returning home. Thus, Chuck finally bravely stepped out of the house. Jimmy also considerately helped his brother open the car door. Before leaving, Jimmy didn't forget to take his own phone. When he picked it up, he found it was out of battery. Jimmy then told Chuck he had forgotten to turn it off. Even with the phone out of battery, Chuck insisted that Jimmy put the phone in the trunk. At HHM, they collected all employees' phones, including Howard's. Kim also requested the front desk to turn off all electronic devices. They're making all this fuss just to welcome Chuck. Seeing this scene, one could tell how important Chuck's status was at HHM. All attention was on Chuck, except for Kim, who stayed behind to help Jimmy carry a box of documents. Then, all senior staff attended this important meeting. Howard was overjoyed. This was a rare major case for their firm, and he was very confident about it. Then, Howard began to arrange specific tasks for execution. At that moment, Jimmy suddenly interrupted Howard to discuss the terms of their cooperation. Howard said Chuck was already a key partner at HHM, and Jimmy would get a 20% cut as a referral. Since the case might take years to conclude, Howard agreed to give Jimmy an advance payment of $20,000. Jimmy thought this was reasonable, and then he requested an office next to Chuck's. Hearing Jimmy's request, Howard hesitated for a moment, then asked everyone else to leave, wanting to discuss this matter privately with Jimmy. Jimmy believed that bringing in such a big case meant it was a given that they would hire him as a lawyer, but to his surprise, Howard said they just wanted the case and had no intention of hiring Jimmy at HHM. Normally, a law firm would be eager to sign on the lawyer who brought in the case. Jimmy couldn't understand why Howard was being so petty. Despite their past conflicts, Jimmy chose to cooperate with Howard for the greater good. Chuck also showed a surprised expression and spoke up for his brother Jimmy.
I don't know what to say. I am very disappointed.
Helpless, Howard could only use the excuse that his partners disagreed. Hearing this, Jimmy decided not to hand over the case to Howard, no matter how easy the money was. As a result, the negotiation between the two fell apart. As Howard was leaving, he glanced at Chuck, as if they shared an unspoken secret. Later, Kim approached her boss to inquire about the reason the case negotiations fell apart, as Jimmy was her friend, and she felt it was unfair to him, but Howard felt like Kim was criticizing his actions, so he angrily reprimanded her to mind her own business. However, just as Kim was about to leave, Howard felt that he might have been too harsh, or maybe he didn't want Kim to misunderstand him, so Howard stopped Kim and asked her to close the office door. Then, he told her the truth.
Close the door.
That night, a frustrated Jimmy carried a full box of liquor to his office in the nail salon. Knowing the truth, Kim had been waiting for him for quite some time. At this moment, Jimmy wished he could tear Howard to pieces. However, Kim advised Jimmy to accept Howard's terms, saying it was the best choice for him, but she didn't explain why. Jimmy was stunned. He thought Kim was sent by Howard to persuade him. He couldn't believe that his only friend wasn't on his side. Jimmy finally lost his temper at Kim for the first time.
You come here peddling that on me? God, you? You sure know where your bread is buttered, huh? You don't want to go up against the boss. Is that it? You're like a pod person. What did Hamlin promise you? Please, tell me he didn't buy you off cheap. Did he promise you the office I asked for? Or did he just swear never to move you back downstairs? Take the deal.
A frustrated Jimmy felt it was unbelievable. This day was just awful. He took out his phone to call Kim and apologize, but his phone was out of battery. So, Jimmy plugged in his phone to charge and decided to use the landline instead. Just before making the call, he looked at his charging phone and felt that something was off. The next morning, Chuck was whistling leisurely. Chuck seemed to be in high spirits, giving off an air of relief. Just as he was about to iron his clothes, he suddenly saw Jimmy sitting on the sofa. Chuck apologized for the failed negotiation with Howard yesterday but said that the visit to the office made him feel much better. He also praised Jimmy's idea of the spacesuit, but Jimmy seemed heavy-hearted. He said he hadn't slept all night and had been thinking about what happened yesterday. Finally, he came to a conclusion. He decided to accept Howard's terms, as it was a substantial amount of money. Compared to handing the case over to Howard, Jimmy expressed that he would rather handle the case with his brother. Chuck agreed with Jimmy's view and said he would try to persuade Howard to reconsider. Hearing this, Jimmy thanked Chuck for his support and said he was lucky to have a brother like him, but Chuck wasn't sure if he could successfully convince Howard. Just as Chuck was about to leave, Jimmy suddenly suggested a way to make Howard change his mind. He proposed that Chuck pretend to resign and threaten Howard. Knowing Chuck's significant status at HHM, it's the absolute best way to get Howard to compromise. If Chuck really wanted to work with him, Jimmy then directly exposed the underlying issue.
You called him. You called Hamlin. I always turn my phone off before I put it in your mailbox. 2 nights ago, it was left on, battery drained. I was so sure that I turned it off, because I always do. It's a habit, right? So it was nagging me. So I called the phone company. Turns out there was a deleted call at 2 a.m. when I was asleep right there. The only person who could have made that call and deleted it is you, Chuck. What was so important that you had to call Howard before our meeting? The only thing I can think, the only thing that makes sense is you told him not to hire me. It was always you, right? Tell me why.
Seeing his scheme uncovered, Chuck had no choice but to come clean.
You're not a real lawyer. University of American Samoa? An online course? What a joke. I worked my ass off to get where I am. And you take these shortcuts and you think suddenly you're my peer? You do what I do because you're funny and you can make people laugh? I committed my life to this.
I thought you were proud of me.
I was. When you straightened out and got a job in the mailroom, I was very proud. The law is sacred. If you abuse that power, people get hurt. This is not a game. You have to know on some level, I know you know I'm right. You know I'm right.
Hearing what Chuck had to say, Jimmy felt there was no point in arguing with him anymore. Jimmy said he had already prepared 3 or 4 days worth of supplies for him. He was fed up and told Chuck to take care of himself from now on. With that, Jimmy left without looking back. He couldn't accept that all of this was orchestrated by the brother he respected. Looking back at the previous plot,
I don't know what to say. I am very disappointed. I really think you should reconsider.
I'm sorry, but no, I think it's best if Jimmy takes the of-counsel fee. We could probably up it a bit. Keep in mind, he will be well compensated in the back end. It's easy money, Jimmy. No reason not to take it.
You have to admit that Chuck and Howard put on quite a performance. If Jimmy hadn't figured out the truth, Howard would have been unfairly blamed. So, here's the question. Have you ever encountered someone like Chuck in your life? He might look like an ordinary gatekeeper, but he is actually a retired Vietnam War veteran. Not only does he have a face that closely resembles Sylvester Stallone's, but his moves are also very swift and precise. If he and Stallone were to fight, who do you think would win? He is none other than Mike, the best supporting actor in the top-tier American TV series Better Call Saul. However, even tough guys often have a tender side, especially when it comes to their families. Because his honest son was killed by 2 corrupt cops, Mike quietly avenged his son's death, but the dead can't come back to life. And Stacy and Kaylee lost the pillar of their family. Mike traveled all the way from Philadelphia to Albuquerque, New Mexico, just to be closer to Stacy and Kaylee and take care of them. One day, while Mike was at work, he received a call from Stacy, who said she needed Mike to watch Kaylee because she was busy with work. Before they could finish their conversation, a car needed to exit the parking lot. Usually strict about his principles, Mike let the car pass for free this time, showing that his principles can be bent for his family. This small detail laid a foundation for the later plot. Mike arrived on time to take care of Kaylee as promised. Stacy soon returned home from work. Just as Mike was about to leave for work, Stacy stopped him, saying she had something to ask him. Stacy took out the first bribe Matt received and asked Mike if she could use the money because since her husband's death, she and her daughter had been living quite frugally. Mike said that if it would make your life better with Kaylee, then you could spend it. Stacy was relieved. She looked at her daughter and then said that the money was just a drop in the bucket. Mike, feeling guilty, understood her real intention for asking him over. Do you remember when Mike first arrived in Albuquerque? He went to the vet Caldera to help him with a gunshot wound? At that time, Caldera offered him some under-the-table jobs, but principled Mike firmly refused. But now, with just a parking lot attendant's salary, he couldn't adequately support his family. So Mike broke his principles again and went back to the pet hospital. To make it look natural, Mike even adopted a stray dog. After the dog's checkup, Mike casually asked Caldera about the under-the-table jobs. After securing a job, Mike gave the dog to Kaylee as a pet. Mike hadn't been there long before he received a new task. Mike arrived early at the designated spot for his new job as a bodyguard. For safety, the employer hired more than just Mike. Soon, a burly man arrived. Man Mountain's weight was easily double Mike's, and Mike could only look up at him. Then another man in camouflage trousers steps in and looks at them with disdain as he tells them about the operation. Sobchak asked if they had done this kind of work before and what weapons they brought. Faced with Sobchak's incessant chatter, the silent Mike didn't want to engage. Out of courtesy, Mike said he only brought a bag of bell pepper sandwiches, which was his usual food. In Breaking Bad, he also carried this when going on missions with Jesse. Hearing that Mike only brought a sandwich, Sobchak started to mock him, saying it was unprofessional to come as a bodyguard without a gun. Sobchak said he brought at least 2 guns and was worried Mike would be a burden. Soon, the employer arrived at the parking lot. The man's name is Price, and he works at a pharmaceutical company. This operation was primarily about him secretly selling stolen contraband. Price felt assured that since Caldera had highly recommended them, they must be extraordinary. The total reward for this job is $1,500, with each person getting $500 upon completion. If there are no objections, they would set off immediately. Sobchak immediately disagreed. He demanded that Mike, who didn't bring a gun, be kicked out, and he and Man Mountain would each get $750. Mike explained that he didn't need to carry a gun. If necessary, he would take one from Sobchak. Hearing this, Sobchak was unconvinced. He pulled out his gun, wanting to see how Mike would take it from him.
You got it.
Fully armed Sobchak was KO'd by unarmed Mike in an instant. Then Mike took all the weapons from Sobchak, discovering to his surprise that Sobchak had brought 4 guns. Did he really think he was playing a video game? Mike asked Man Mountain if he needed another gun. Man Mountain, terrified, ran away, later switching careers to become a bodyguard for several ladies. Mike threw all of Sobchak's weapons into the trash and told Price that he would handle it alone and that the $1,500 wouldn't need to be split. The two arrived on time at the designated spot, but the other party was late. First-time wrongdoer Price was a bit nervous. Rehearsing the upcoming scene repeatedly, Mike advised him to talk less, have the other party pay first, and count the money before delivering the goods if everything checked out. Before long, the other party arrived in a car, and it was Nacho, Tuco's subordinate, who got out. Following Mike's instructions, Price collected the money first and started counting it. This was the first time Nacho and Mike met, though they didn't say much. They already sized each other up with their eyes. Mike asked Price if the money was all there, but Price said it was $20 short. He was ready to overlook it and proceed with the deal. Mike promptly stopped him, insisting that Nacho make up the $20, or the deal was off.
You serious? You saying I intentionally shorted you?
No. Mistakes happen.
You're really willing to blow up this deal over 20 bucks?
Are you?
Seeing that Mike wasn't easy to fool, Nacho took the money out of his pocket and arrogantly threw it on the ground. Docile Price eagerly picked it up and then handed over the goods to Nacho for inspection. Seeing that the contraband was in order, Nacho glanced at Mike again. This time, Nacho didn't get any advantage. After Nacho and his men left, Mike's task was completed. Price, still puzzled, asked Mike how he knew he didn't need to bring a gun. Mike explained that before coming, he had already checked Nacho's background. He knew Nacho was an underling for a Mexican illegal organization, and this deal was made behind their backs, so Nacho didn't want to cause any trouble. Hearing this, Price marveled at Mike's capability. Mike then reminded Price that if he wanted to be a criminal, he had to do his homework first. Price tried to argue, but the fact was right in front of him. His actions already constituted a crime. Mike taught him that no matter who you do business with, you must adhere to the agreement. Mike not only completed the bodyguard task excellently but also gave Price a hard lesson. One has to admit that the $1,500 spent was truly worth it. It seems the two might have opportunities to cooperate in the future.